you were in Pennsylvania by the time when the war broke out?
Not Pennsylvania, Ohio.
Ohio, thank you. And the war broke out when you were living there, and you were drafted or you enlisted?
When the war broke out, I was 15 years old. So I finished high school the last 2 years. And in my senior year, after my graduation from high school, I decided, along with my parents, that I should enlist in the Navy and choose that rather than be drafted in the Army.
Now, once you enlisted, did you have to wait very long to be
I
called up?
enlisted about June of '41, and it was Thanksgiving Day when I was called up. I was, at least I got a letter saying I had to report by Thanksgiving Day.
And where'd you have to report to?
I reported that to a, they collected all of us who had similar enlistments, I guess, and put us on a bus and drove us to Cleveland, Ohio, on Thanksgiving Day. And there we were housed up, and we were given a physical exam. And then from there, they put us on a train, and we went to Chicago to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center in 1941. No, excuse me, that was 1944.
Okay.
So the war had been going on for 2 years prior to my enlistment and entering the Navy.
Now, did you ask for duty on a carrier, or you just got assigned?
Well, during the time at Great Lakes, I spent 10 weeks there in basic training, and they gave us a number of tests of one kind or another, and finally they just said, we're going to send you to a service school after 10 weeks. And so they sent me to a service school in Seattle, Washington.
What is a service school?
The service school was a fire control service school.
Okay.
The fire control meant that you did things to help gunfire aiming at enemies. It's kind of on a board ship, a very intricate procedure, the way they aim their guns at any target. And so I spent something like 2 months or a little more in Seattle, Washington. And then from there, they assigned me to a special school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And that special school was an optical rangefinder operator. And on these carriers, they have rangefinders that aim their guns if there's a target to aim at. And usually it's a flying target. And so I spent a couple of months in Florida, spent the whole week on a train going to Florida. It was quite a thing. We put on a Pullman car, and you stayed on that car, and you went through several changes of engines, and finally ended up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I spent a couple of months in Florida learning how to operate an optical rangefinder. You're looking into a tube, and it's got eyes out here, and you determine what range that is to the target. in many cases, you're just giving them a target angle as to where the angle of the target is. Well, at that point, they determined that I should go to then a ship. And they had an aircraft carrier that was being built in Brooklyn, New York. And so they sent me from Florida, I went to a housing area in Newport, Rhode Island, where they were collecting all of their shipmates together. Because the ship was being built in Brooklyn, New York, and wasn't ready yet. So we spent just a week or two in Rhode Island getting acquainted, and then they shipped us back down to Brooklyn, New York. And we were actually housed on the ship for several weeks before it was commissioned. And at that point, I have information about the commissioning and all that, but it was commissioned in 1945 or something like that. In a big ceremony in Brooklyn, New York. Mrs. Roosevelt attended, President Truman attended, and we had a big ceremony about that. And then after the ship was commissioned, we were set out to sea for exercises to see that the ship was working right and all the crew knew what they were supposed to do. Well, it was quite an experience.
I guess so. Now, did the carrier go out to sea?
Well,
were you on the carrier? Did you go out to sea for tests?
We were out to sea shortly, and a big storm came along, and the ship's commander decided the ship had to be out at sea during the storm. They don't like it on land because that's when most of the damage can happen, I guess. But we were out to sea shortly, and we weathered that storm. That's the only time I kind of got a little seasick. Because first venture out on board. Then we went back into port, and they do a lot of other things, bringing on provisions, ammunition. Well, you had to go down to Norfolk, Virginia to bring on a lot of provisions of one kind or another, including ammunition and all the kinds of things that our ship was going to be using. So we had a sea voyage down to Norfolk, Virginia, and we were there for several weeks. And then we went on
Was the ship ever armed? The carrier, was it armed?
the ship was never harmed, no.
Okay.
It was never in battle. But our ship took trips to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, and back and forth a couple of times just to get the feeling of working together.
Were there any airplanes on the carrier or just empty?
There were no airplanes on the carrier at the time.
Okay.
And then once we decided that the ship was okay, then they started bringing planes on board. And they would fly in, land on the deck, and then they would be moved down into the hangar deck.
Yep.
So that took some very careful negotiations as well as work to get all that together.
So then did you get a chance to go out to sea any place?
Well, our maiden voyage was from Guantanamo Bay to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And this is basically after Germany had capitulated. So we were ready to go to Japan or into the Pacific if the war continued. And so they readied the ship to do that kind of thing. It was too wide to go through the Panama Canal at the time.
Oh,
So we had to go around South America if we were going to go to the Pacific. But anyway, we did training exercises with the planes landing and taking off and being loaded and all that kind of thing. And finally, the Japan, Truman decided that they'd use the atomic bomb on Japan, and this was getting to be the fall of 1945.
how did you know the bomb had been dropped
Heard about it.
on a ship?
In the ship, yes. They made announcements about that.
Did you turn around and go back to the States then? Or did you stay out there?
We ended up back in Brooklyn, or Norfolk, Virginia, really, after the war, after Japan capitulated. And then that would be basically the end of World War II. But they kept us in the Navy until they had a way to discharge us.
Okay, we'll see what the dog does here in a minute. You got discharged where?
I was discharged from Norfolk, Virginia. That would have been in 1946. It was very early, 46, 40 in the spring. And I found my way home to Steubenville after that.
So the timing was pretty good for you. You're in the Navy, you're in the carrier, whole thing comes to an end, and you didn't have to get shot at.
That's about it. The training exercises exposed us to a lot of things. There were planes that were lost in practice, in exercising, in taking off and landing on a carrier. There were people that were killed that way. There were people killed on the ship just by walking into a moving prop that they didn't remember or was there. Because all our planes were prop planes at that point.
Yes.
It was kind of an interesting time for me. It's time that I grew up in. I didn't know anything about the Navy before that, or about government. So it was quite a learning experience. I would say it was a major point in my life where I grew up as a person.
Big time.
Big time. And because I didn't know what I was going to do before I went in the Navy. And when I got there, I learned that education was important. And I hadn't thought about that before. When I mingled among other learned people, I found out I needed to learn a lot more, become smarter in some ways. And so I even signed up for a college English class while I was the last year I was in the Navy. And when I got out, I decided I was going to enroll at a college, even though I didn't have the funds to go to college beforehand. I had the GI Bill then. They had passed that. and that would take care of it, of my college expense. So that was a really great thing.
The VA college funds, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. They paid for all of our room and board and tuition. Gave us a little bit of extra money every week. They used to call it 52.50, $52 a week for 50 weeks.
Could you pick a school of your choice?
Well, it's interesting. I had decided to enroll at Miami University in Ohio. I knew nothing about the place, but I just heard some of my friends had gone there. And then just the summer of, would have been, I don't know, 1947 or 8, 47 or 8, I had a good friend who was enrolling at Ohio State University. And he was a pre-med student, and a good student. And he needed a roommate. He said, "I've got a rooming house, and we need another person to come in there. Are you interested?" And so I thought about it, and I said, "Okay, that sounds like a good deal to me." So I went to Ohio State University as a transfer student, basically. I had started at a little college in Steubenville that had just begun, and I did some work there, and then I transferred to Ohio State. And that's the best move I ever made. Ohio State was a wonderful institution, great learning place, very helpful. It made me a better person, and I had always have enjoyed knowing that I graduated from there. In 1941, and December 7th, when the president went on the radio and announced that Japan had struck Pearl Harbor with bombs and sunk a lot of ships there, I was at a friend's house with my parents. It was a Sunday evening, December 7th. And that was the beginning of really what the war was all about, and as far as I was concerned anyway. But during our school years, we had some physical education classes at the high school, and the instructor said the draftees were not in very good physical condition, and that they were being asked to exercise us boys a lot more. And so that was really the beginning of being war ready, in a sense to me. Here we were just young kids, and they were asking us, let's get in condition because you may be asked to go to war and you need to be in physical condition. And so we were going through some very basic exercises, and I've forgotten what they called them, but there was a whole different routine for physical education than it had been previously. So that meant get ready because you may be called up. So that happened for the next couple of years while I was finishing my high school. And I don't know if it made any difference, but I did. We did it.
Well, it's the most unusual experience you're ever going to have, and you survived it. So that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Did I cover everything? Did I miss anything? We'll think about it, and if we did, we'll pick up on it again. But in the meantime, thank you for allowing me into your home.
Well, that's fine. I'm happy that you're doing this and cataloging some experiences of World War II. It's a forgotten war, it seems almost like now. And I never did see any battles, but I'll tell you what, we had some shipmates that came aboard the Roosevelt that had been in the Pacific and had been on ships that were sunk by bombs, and they never wanted to talk about it. It seems like they were happy to be with us, but they went through the more terrible part of the war than I ever did.